Over 50% of all Bitcoin in circulation is now held at an unrealized loss. Let that sit for a second. More than half of all the Bitcoin that exists, not trading volume, not derivatives, actual Bitcoin on actual wallets, is sitting underwater right now. The people holding it paid more than it is currently worth, and they are just sitting there, holding, hoping. And I don't say that with any judgment because, look, I understand that feeling. Every single person who has been in this space long enough understands that feeling. But here is the question that I cannot stop thinking about. If you are holding an asset where more than half of all supply is at a loss, what does that actually tell you about the thesis? What does it tell you about the story that was sold? And more importantly, what does it tell you about where the smart money is quietly moving while everyone is focused on the Bitcoin pain? Because here is the thing, this is not a random number. The 50% unrealized loss threshold is not just a bad week or a bad month. It is a structural signal. It is the market telling you something about the relationship between narrative and reality. And if you are an XLM holder, if you are an HBAR holder, if you have been sitting in utility assets while the store of value narrative has been playing out in real time, this moment is worth understanding properly, not for the short-term price action, for what it reveals about which assets are actually built to survive the kind of market reality we are sitting inside right now. So let me start with the Bitcoin thesis itself, because I want to be fair about this. The Bitcoin store of value narrative is not stupid. It is not a scam. The idea that a fixed supply, decentralized, censorship-resistant asset could function as a hedge against currency debasement and monetary inflation, that idea has real intellectual weight. And it attracted real institutional capital. MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy, holds over 500,000 Bitcoin on its balance sheet. BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF crossed $10 billion in assets under management, faster than almost any ETF in history. These are not retail tourists. These are serious institutions making serious allocation decisions. But here is where the store of value thesis starts to develop cracks that I think most people in this space have been too polite to talk about directly. A store of value, a real store of value, needs to actually store value consistently across market cycles. Gold has done this for thousands of years, not because people believed in it emotionally, but because it had properties that made it structurally useful as a value store: scarcity, durability, divisibility, portability. Bitcoin has those properties too in digital form. Nobody disputes that. But what gold does not do, what gold has never done, is trade like a leveraged technology stock. And Bitcoin, for all its store of value branding, has repeatedly, consistently, across every major market cycle, traded like a leveraged technology stock. When risk appetite goes up, Bitcoin goes up more than almost everything else. When risk appetite goes down, Bitcoin goes down more than almost everything else. That is not store of value behavior. That is high beta speculative asset behavior. And when you have a high beta speculative asset where more than 50% of all circulating supply is at an unrealized loss, you have a very specific kind of problem. You have a supply overhang of holders who are either frozen, unable to sell because they cannot stomach crystallizing the loss, or quietly waiting for any meaningful recovery to reduce their position. That supply overhang is real, it's on-chain, it's visible, and it creates a ceiling on price recovery that is structural rather than sentiment-driven. Now, I'm not here to bury Bitcoin. That's not what this video is about. What I am here to do is use this moment, this specific data-verified moment where over half of all Bitcoin supply is underwater, to ask a different question. The question is not, is Bitcoin going to recover? The question is, what kind of asset do you actually want to be holding when the financial system is restructuring itself around utility, around programmability, around the ability to move value across borders in seconds, to tokenize real-world assets, to serve the billions of people that the traditional banking system has either abandoned or never properly reached? Because that restructuring is happening right now. While the Bitcoin unrealized loss headlines are getting all the attention, something else is happening in the background that almost nobody is talking about in the same breath. The infrastructure for a utility-based financial system is going live, quietly, systematically, and the assets at the center of that infrastructure are not the ones with the biggest market caps or the loudest communities. They are the ones that were built for exactly the moment we are moving into. XLM, HBAR. Let me tell you what these assets actually are and why this moment matters for them in a way that I think even long-term holders sometimes do not fully articulate. Stellar, the network that XLM runs on, was not built to compete with Bitcoin. It was never trying to be digital gold. It was built to do one specific thing extraordinarily well: move value across borders, between currencies, between financial systems, for the people and institutions that the existing correspondent banking infrastructure has failed. The Stellar Development Foundation has been building real payment corridors, real remittance infrastructure, real connections to central bank digital currency pilots for years, not talking about it, not writing white papers about it, actually building it. The MoneyGram partnership, before MoneyGram got acquired and the relationship evolved, proved that Stellar could handle real volume on real corridors for real people sending real money home to their families. That's not a speculative future use case. That already happened. And the Stellar Network's compliance infrastructure, the built-in KYC and AML capabilities, the ability to issue regulated digital assets on the Stellar ledger, the ISO 20022 compatibility, these are not features that were added as an afterthought to try to attract institutional attention. They are core to what Stellar was designed to be: a network for compliant, regulated, institutional-grade value transfer at the speed and cost profile that actually makes financial inclusion possible. Not financial inclusion as a marketing statement, financial inclusion as an engineering requirement that shaped every architectural decision from day one. So when I look at a world where over 50% of Bitcoin supply is underwater, where the store of value narrative is visibly under stress, and I look at XLM sitting there with its payment corridor infrastructure, its central bank relationships, its ISO 20022 native architecture, its track record of live institutional deployments, I feel something that is genuinely hard to describe without sounding like I'm trying to sell you something. But it's closer to awe than anything else, because I'm watching an asset that was built for a specific structural role in the future financial system, sitting quietly while the attention is entirely somewhere else. Now, let me talk about HBAR, because I think HBAR deserves its own section here, rather than being lumped together with XLM as if they are the same kind of asset doing the same kind of thing. They are not. They complement each other, but they are different. And understanding how they are different is important for understanding why both of them matter in the context of this Bitcoin unrealized loss signal. Hedera Hashgraph, the network that HBAR runs on, is not a blockchain. I know that sounds like a technicality, but it's actually fundamental to what makes HBAR's position unique. Hashgraph consensus is a different approach to distributed ledger technology that achieves something that traditional blockchain consensus mechanisms struggle with: absolute asynchronous Byzantine fault-tolerant finality, which means, in plain language, when a transaction settles on Hedera, it's done. Not probably done, not done unless a longer chain appears. Done, final, irreversible, in seconds, at scale. That property, absolute finality at enterprise throughput, is not just a nice technical specification. It is the specific property that enterprise financial applications require. When you are settling securities, when you are clearing derivatives, when you are recording the transfer of a tokenized real-world asset on a ledger that a regulator can audit, you can't work with probabilistic finality. You need the transaction to be final the same way a signed contract is final. Hedera provides that, and it provides it at a cost per transaction and at a throughput level that enterprise applications actually need, not just in a test environment, but in production. And here's the part that I find most extraordinary about where HBAR sits right now. The tokenization of real-world assets, mortgages, securities, commodities, carbon credits, supply chain records, that's the next frontier of what distributed ledger technology is actually going to be used for at enterprise scale. Not crypto trading, not speculative price action, actual tokenization of actual assets that exist in the real world and need to be tracked, transferred, and settled with legal enforceability and regulatory compliance. The market for tokenized real-world assets is projected by institutions like BlackRock and Boston Consulting Group, not by crypto maximalists, to reach tens of trillions of dollars within the next decade. Hedera's architecture, its finality properties, its enterprise compliance infrastructure, its throughput capabilities, these are precisely the properties that tokenized real-world asset applications require. And Hedera has been building enterprise relationships in exactly that space. The supply chain tokenization use cases, the carbon credit market infrastructure, the enterprise data integrity applications where being able to prove that a record has not been tampered with is a legal and regulatory requirement. These are not pilot programs that have been running for 6 months. These are production deployments that have been processing real enterprise data for real enterprise clients. Now, I want to bring these two things together, the Bitcoin unrealized loss signal and the XLM and HBAR utility infrastructure, because I think the connection is more important than it might look on the surface. When over 50% of Bitcoin supply goes underwater, what you are actually seeing is the market delivering a verdict on the gap between narrative and utility. Bitcoin's narrative, store of value, digital gold, inflation hedge, is an enormously powerful narrative. It is arguably the most powerful narrative in the history of crypto. But narratives, no matter how powerful, eventually have to answer to reality. And the reality is that an asset where most holders are at a loss is an asset where the narrative has outrun the underlying utility in a way that the market is now correcting. That is the big reveal. That is the thing that I think this moment is actually showing us if you are willing to look at it without the emotional attachment to a particular asset's success or failure. The market is in the early stages of a generational shift in which assets it assigns durable value to. And the assets it is going to assign durable value to in the long run are not going to be the ones with the best stories. They are going to be the ones with the most irreplaceable utility. The ones that are doing something that the financial system actually needs done and cannot easily replicate elsewhere. XLM is moving value for people who have no other good option for moving value. That is irreplaceable utility. HBAR is providing the finality and integrity infrastructure that enterprise-grade tokenization applications require. That is irreplaceable utility. These are not features that can be replicated by a competitor writing a better white paper. They are the result of years of deliberate architectural decisions, of real deployments, of real institutional relationships built one at a time through actual performance rather than through marketing. And here's what I keep coming back to when I think about the 50% Bitcoin loss number. The people who are sitting underwater on Bitcoin right now, many of them bought the narrative. They bought digital gold. They bought inflation hedge. They bought the idea that simply holding a scarce asset was enough. And I'm not dismissing that thesis entirely because there is truth in it. But utility is not waiting for narrative to resolve itself. Utility is just happening. While the Bitcoin loss narrative dominates every headline and every conversation, Stellar is processing cross-border payments in corridors that SWIFT has retreated from. Hedera is providing data integrity infrastructure for enterprise applications that need certainty at scale. The work is being done. The rails are being built. The use cases are going live. And that asymmetry between the loudness of the Bitcoin narrative and the quietness of the utility infrastructure being built underneath everything, that asymmetry is exactly where generational wealth has always been created in financial markets. Not in the loudest asset, in the most useful one that people have not yet priced correctly. Let me talk about something concrete here, because I think this conversation can sometimes drift into abstraction, and I want to keep it grounded. The Stellar network currently handles remittance corridors in Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America, regions where the average cost of sending money home has historically been somewhere between 6 and 10% of the transaction value, according to World Bank data. 6 to 10%. Think about that. A migrant worker in Singapore sending money home to the Philippines loses 6 cents to 10 cents of every dollar they earn just to move it across a border. Stellar brings that cost down to fractions of a cent. That is not a future use case. That is a current reality. That is the stellar network doing what it was built to do right now for real people. And Hedera, the HBAR network, processed over 6 billion transactions as of recent reporting. 6 billion. That is not test transactions. That is not internal benchmark runs. That is production traffic from enterprise applications that have deployed on Hedera because it gives them what they need. The Coupon Bureau migrated the entire U.S. digital coupon infrastructure, billions of coupons processed annually, to Hedera. ServiceNow integrated Hedera for data provenance. These are not crypto-native companies trying to find a use case. These are established enterprise organizations solving established enterprise problems using Hedera as the infrastructure layer because it's the right tool for the job. So when I see Bitcoin's 50% unrealized loss number, and I feel the weight of that, the real human weight of it, the people who bought at the top, the people who have been holding through this, the people who are questioning everything they thought they knew about this space, what I also feel is something else. I feel the contrast between the noise and the quiet, between the narrative under stress and the utility going live, between the asset that was sold as the future of money and the assets that are actually becoming the infrastructure of the future financial system, one deployment at a time. This is a generational shift in which assets the market selects for, and I think we're right in the middle of it. Not at the beginning, not at the end, in the middle, which is simultaneously the most uncomfortable and the most important place to be, because in the middle of a generational shift, the signal is still mixed. The old narrative still has volume. The new reality is still being built. The price discovery has not happened yet. And the people who understand what is happening before the price discovery are the ones who are positioned for what comes after it. XLM and HBAR were not built to win a narrative competition. They were not built to have the most passionate community, or the most media coverage, or the most dramatic price action. They were built to solve specific, structural, irreplaceable problems in the way that value moves through the world. And the financial system, slowly, stubbornly, but unmistakably, is moving towards exactly the kind of infrastructure that XLM and HBAR represent. Not because anyone convinced it to, because the problems it is trying to solve require the solutions that these networks provide. That is not a narrative, that is an engineering reality. And that engineering reality is patient. It doesn't need you to believe in it. It doesn't need headlines. It just needs time to become undeniable. And every deployment, every live corridor, every enterprise integration, every tokenized real-world asset that goes on-chain, each one of those is another data point making the undeniability come sooner. The 50% Bitcoin unrealized loss is a moment. It's a signal. It's the market pausing and asking itself a question it should have been asking more carefully all along. Which assets are we holding because of what they are, and which are we holding because of what we were told they would become? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer for a lot of people right now. But for XLM holders and HBAR holders who have been watching the infrastructure build quietly while the narrative assets got all the attention, that question has an answer that feels like watching something click into place. The system is selecting for utility. It always does eventually. The noise fades. The narratives get tested against reality. And what survives is what actually does something that couldn't easily be done without it. XLM moves value for the people the financial system left behind. HBAR provides the finality and integrity that enterprise tokenization requires. Those are not going away. Those are not narratives that can be broken by a bad market cycle. Those are functions. And functions, when they are irreplaceable, get priced accordingly. Not immediately, not on any particular timeline that you or I can confidently predict, but inevitably, with the kind of inevitability that comes from being the right solution to a real problem in a world that's running out of patience for wrong solutions. I'm watching this happen in real time, and honestly, I'm in awe of it. The quietness of it, the deliberateness of it, the way it just keeps building while everything else is loud. So here's where I want to leave you.
Not with a price target, not with a timeline, with a question that I think is worth sitting with seriously. We're watching a generational shift in which assets the financial system selects for. The store of value narrative is under visible stress. The utility infrastructure is going live. And the question, the one I genuinely want to hear your answer to in the comments, is this. Do you think the market has already started pricing the shift from narrative assets to utility assets? Or do you think we are still early enough that the majority of that price discovery has not happened yet? Because the answer to that question determines everything about how you think about your position right now. And I don't think there's an obvious answer. I think it's genuinely open. And I think this community is exactly the right one to be having that conversation. Drop it in the comments and be specific. Tell me what you are actually seeing on-chain, in partnerships, in deployments, that makes you think the market is or is not pricing this shift yet, because that conversation is the one worth having. If this landed differently than you expected, hit the like button. It genuinely gets this in front of more people who are asking the right questions instead of just chasing green candles. Subscribe if you want the kind of analysis that starts from what is actually being built rather than what is being talked about. And share this with someone who is currently underwater on something and questioning whether they understand what they are actually holding, because that question is worth asking properly. The system is selecting. The question is whether you see it yet.